Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Martin Nicholson from ProAction HR. Welcome to our first ProAction HR webinar, and delighted to talk to you today and start a group conversation about the biggest issue probably facing us as businesses in 2021 and the return of our staff successfully to the office, the work premises, or any other guise along those lines. Now, clearly different organisations are at different stages in terms of the return, and in terms of some manufacturing may have been in their premises throughout the past year under COVID, but actually a number of us are looking at the issues, and a number of our clients are looking at the issues that face the organisation, whether it be returning immediately when the government allows, whether it be actually the future of work and the way in which the culture and the style of working in the UK and across the globe may well be changing. Delighted, given that breadth and the depth of this subject, to have a real broad panel to talk about this subject, aided and abetted by David Mackey from Reese Draper Wright. David, give us a wave there, please. He leads, practice partner, leads at Reese Draper Wright, and I've seen him facilitate such conversations so successfully, we had to bring him into this event today. And alongside me in terms of guest speakers, we've got Joe Nicholson, Leon Deakin, and Andy Cast. So without further ado, I'm going to pass to David to lead us through this complex situation and hopefully make some sense of the issues that arise. David, over to you.
Thanks very much, Martin, and thanks very much for the invitation to come along and facilitate this for us all today. I think maybe the best place we could start today is with a couple of introductions. Let's get everybody introduced so we all know who each other are. Leon, would you like to go first?
Yeah, happy to. Hi everyone. My name's Leon Deakin. I'm a partner at the law firm Coffin New. I head up the employment team, so I've spent the last 12 months being incredibly busy for obvious reasons, but looking forward to talking about the future and what's coming next.
Thank you, Leon. Great to have you here. Andy, maybe over to yourself first. You've got a great flower arrangement behind you as well.
Absolutely. I was going to have some flowers around. So good afternoon, everybody. I'm Andy Cast. I'm an HR consultant, counsellor, mediator, executive coach, and I work alongside Joe and Martin at ProAction HR, but also for the People Whisperer. And I normally support businesses and individuals with any learning and development needs they have, people relationship management, and any other development challenges.
Fantastic. Thank you, Andy. And Joe, over to yourself.
Last but not least.
Definitely not least.
I'm Joe Nicholson. Hello, everyone. My background is psychology, occupational psychology masters, health psychology masters. So I work for ProAction HR, looking at the well-being of employees in the workplace and how to help organisations address those needs of individuals.
Fantastic, Joe. Thanks very much for that. So a little bit of format today. We've got a couple of pre-agreed questions just to set the tone and get things up and running for everybody. I've certainly got one to get us kicked off with. And I know we've got a large amount of attendees already tuned in, and it seems to be adding all of the time. I know some of the names on there already. Lovely to see you back at some of these webinars. So what I thought we would do, or what we've agreed we would do, I should say more so, is get a couple of questions kicked off just to get everybody warmed up and kind of deal with some of the real pertinent issues. On the right-hand side, or I should say on the bottom of your screen, attendees, you'll see that there is a chat function with 3 little dots in the middle of it. If you have any questions throughout that you'd like to put to the panelists, please pop them in there, and I will do my absolute best to get to all of them in the hour or so. And we're going to try and finish promptly at around 2 o'clock, maybe just afterwards, depending on how things go. But we're certainly going to try and get us through as many questions as we possibly can. It's also worthwhile noting that we're recording the session, and we'll certainly share the recording with everybody. So if there are HR leaders or small business leaders on the session, and maybe the teams weren't able to attend, you can share it on with them. Equally, if we don't get to any of your questions, we'll certainly make a note of them and make sure that we'll follow up with any questions that we don't get to individually, and we'll certainly share ProAction HR's contact details at the end. So I hope that covers everything. I think it does. I think maybe the best thing we can do is move on to the first question, and it's one where all 5 of us are in client-facing roles. And we're all dealing with and supporting our current client base through quite tough times at the moment. And I think in relation to that, what are we noticing collectively and individually in supporting our clients with the key issues that are keeping them awake at night at the moment, in particular relation to the theme and topic of today, the subject of returning to work? So those key issues that our clients are being kept awake with at the moment. Leon, it's probably always worthwhile starting with employment to begin with. So should we go with you first to see what your thoughts are from an employment law perspective?
Yeah, happy to. And unsurprisingly, the last couple of months, I've seen a shift in what people have been talking to me about. And certainly last year, over the summer, towards the end of the year, a lot of clients were still in survival mode, just panic mode. What do we do? How do we furlough people? How do we bring people off furlough? All those questions. But it's definitely now turning towards the future. And there are so many questions. It was actually quite hard for me, sort of thinking about this, to distill them down into just a couple. But I'd say there's probably 2 broad themes. That the first is there are a lot of immediate questions, sort of things that can't really wait too much longer. And that I'd sort of summarize those as being what are the practicalities of actually getting people back into the office in the world in which we find ourselves. So what do we do about staff who are reluctant to return for whatever reason? There's a multitude of reasons. How do we make the premises COVID secure? Even if they have been COVID secure, how do we make it COVID secure with more people, coming back? What about people being vaccinated? Do we need to test people? So there's all those sort of immediate questions, probably a bit more longer term, or sort of looking longer term, but certainly things that are increasingly on clients' radar is just, what does the workplace of the future look like? Do we need as many office premises? Are people going to work much more agilely and flexibly than before? How do we keep staff sort of engaged, working the way they want, but also suiting the needs of the business? So that's probably the sort of key, slightly longer term frame. The other thing, just to briefly mention on the longer term things, we're seeing a lot of clients now being more concerned about, if they did furlough staff, do they need to have a look back to check that they did it right in case HMRC come and audit them? Because we've seen some of our bigger clients already being contacted. So that's definitely something to perhaps turn your mind to.
Fantastic stuff. Thank you very much, Leon. There's so many topics there covered already, but there's so much to think about. But maybe Andy, yourself, maybe more so from the psychology perspective or the people perspective. I know that's what you focus on, but from your perspective, what are you noticing that's keeping your customers awake at the moment?
So certainly from the counselling and coaching practice, the conversations I'm having with people and across my network actually is about the anxiety about returning to work. That's building up for people already, because there's a big change to come, and we've had 12, if not more, months of perhaps working from home, where that has given us new freedoms. We can nip off and do the washing in 5 minutes between a meeting. Or we can take the dog out for a walk or get some exercise. Those freedoms will be disappearing, and I think that's causing some people to think about the anxiety around that. And not only the anxiety around that, but how they look. If any of you are like me, then you've all put on a little bit of weight over the COVID period, because it was very, very easy to eat some of our emotions. I've certainly put on some weight, and I am not looking forward to the day where it comes when I have to put a suit on again for the very first time. So that kind of anxiety is always going to be weighing heavy on how people are feeling about the return to work.
Some very, very relevant points there that I think we're all subconsciously going through, or the great majority are. Joe, maybe from yourself, again, from the psychology perspective, any particular thoughts from yourself on that kind of broad bucket question?
Well, I mean, I think it's just the whole awareness that organisations have and business leaders of some of these concerns that Andy's raising. And from where Leon's coming through, it's from an organisation, how do they address all of these issues, considering the personal point of view of each individual and doing it in a way that they feel confident and contained, because I think there's a lot of organisations that are really worried about opening that can of worms, especially if we're talking about some of these arenas of mental health and anxiety and perhaps some of the other things that go hand in that. I think organisations are aware of the pressure that individuals are feeling and some of that uncertainty. We've already seen a question here about that travelling to work. Just being on track, the things for individuals who are out of their control. How close is someone going to stand next to me on the train? I think organisations are aware that people are coming back to the workplace with some of these issues, but what are some of the practical things that they can put in place that perhaps is taking them out of their comfort zone? These are things that organisations they've been aware of, but haven't really got a programme in place and maybe just a little bit afraid of how big that could get.
Yeah, there's so many things you can lift and uncover the next layer of, so many out there. And then and maybe that's where the likes of a Martin of this world comes into, from the generalist HR leader perspective. How do you package all of these things together? What are you noticing when you look at it from a HR leader's perspective as you consult with various organizations?
Great question. And I think for me, what I'm hearing in the marketplace, what I'm hearing from fellow HR practitioners, what I'm hearing from business owners is actually we're all aware of some of the issues, but actually it's the size and the magnitude of the change so much that maybe we're not ready. We're not in all cases planned as well as we could. I mean, Joe there talked rightly about programs in place. Great to hear, to see participants tuning into today, because it means that overall they've got a concern about the return to the workplace, and hopefully this adds one element of learnings and different experiences. But actually, where's the plans in every organisation's documents to make sure they get a safe return and a successful return? Part of it for me is, how has the experience of the last year been? Do staff trust their organisations more or less than when COVID first hit? Because if they trust more, and I have heard of a lot of instances where engagement has gone upwards because of the way in which the organisation has treated their staff and the feeling of health and safety and people first type principle. So then you go, okay, can you build on that? And how do you make sure that your actual return doesn't erode that trust? That actually you've given it every thought. You've thought about the public transport issues. You've thought about varying the shifts, etc. It's all now part of the planning. And of course, some organisations are back. Some have yet to get back. When you reach that point, you go, right, we're ready. Or the government announces offices need to return or should return. Have we got that plan in place to make sure that is as smooth and successful as possible?
Yeah, sorry, just jumping on the back of that, Martin. Okay, is that whole point that all organisations want their individuals to return, having faced some level of adversity just by having the whole change, and want them to thrive. And part of that whole way of being able to adapt to that new situation and being able to thrive is having this transition done well. And so that's why it's so good to have this programme and the thought happening now, because it being done well will help the confidence of the individual and help them come back and thrive. Just wanted to add that on your end.
Yeah, really good.
Great point, Joe. Great point. I think that sets the scene quite nicely in terms of some of the things that are going through some people's heads. But I was on the phone this morning, and I'm just going to, before we get to a great question from Ken in a moment, but just a slightly more holistic question. I was on the phone this morning to a global insurance group of mine, about 5,000 people globally. Some parts of their organization have already gone back to work. but this CHRO is actually based here in the UK. And we were talking about those guys, her and her team going back to work, her UK-wide team or organization going back to the workplace over the next couple of months. And one of the things she posed, or one of the questions she rather, it was a great debate. One of the things she posed to me was, is the future of the workplace or the office-based workplace in jeopardy? Is that going to change? And what will the workplace look like in 12 months' time? Because before we get into the debate of how we return to work, I'm very, very conscious that, like Emma this morning, the working environment is going to change. And I was wondering, maybe Leon, if we could start with yourself again. What have you heard of in terms of how is the workplace going to change in terms of, and I know there's not a concrete answer here, but we're all picking up signs and noises from our clients. Any particular thoughts on that from yourself, Leon?
Yes. I mean, certainly it's a hot topic of conversation. And of course, there are a number of clients where, you know, they carried on working as normal and things will stay the same because of the nature of their business. But certainly those with office-based workers in particular, but I think, you know, other companies as well, perhaps with people where roles enable this, I think that expectation has fundamentally shifted. I mean, I had certainly noticed it within our own firm and talking to clients in the last few years that certainly new staff coming in at trainee level, maybe the younger level, were expecting a lot more about, you know, or expecting more from their employer in terms of flexibility, where and how they could work. And I think this has just massively accelerated that. And so I think the office of the future will not look like it has in the past. If I'm completely honest, I'm urging a lot of my clients to still just take their time before making any final decisions, because there has been a roller coaster. As we went into lockdown, the overwhelming message was, this is going to be a disaster. How are we going to make it work? A couple of months in, actually, this has worked well. It's fantastic. We're never coming back to the office. And I think we're sort of somewhere in the middle now, in general terms. When I speak to a lot of clients, we want a lot more agile and flexible working, but we want to have some working in the office as well. We've got to find that happy medium. And the reality is, I think the only way to find that happy medium is speak to your staff, you know, actually engage with them about what does it look like. But I do think in general, there will be much more agile and flexible working.
Maybe I can.
Thank you, Leon.
If I could
go on, Andy. I knew you'd have something to say on this one.
Absolutely. I mean, everything that Leon said there is absolutely appropriate, because we don't want to go from one world straight into another. And just because flexible and agile working, certainly in my opinion, it is the way of the future, it won't work for everybody. So that engagement piece about asking staff what they want and how they want to work for, and actually not having a one size fits all, you know, just because 50% of the workforce like flexible and agile working, that applies to everybody. We've got to consider what everybody needs. And if we start forcing people to work from home and not consider the fact that actually, if they share a house with 6 other people and those other 5 or 6 are really loud, it might not be appropriate for them to work from home. So whilst I am an absolute advocate for flexibility and agility in a working, a working program, I don't think that we should just go in there and say, this is going to work for us just because it's worked over lockdown. We had to make it work over lockdown. And I think we've all done a really good job of making it work, but we can't just make assumptions that that's the way of the future. So it's about having that two-way conversation with everybody about what's appropriate.
Yeah, and just to add to that, Andy, there's good legal reasons to do that as well, because of course, policy, procedure, contracts and all that type of stuff take time to write and implement. You don't want to do it and then regret at your leisure that you're now going to have to change it all again. So better to take your time and get it right the first time, I think.
Good on you, good balance. And Joe, I'm sure there's a psychological, human part to this that you would consider. You know, it's not just about the practicalities of it. There's also what goes on in people's heads, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, whilst I think there's a lot of anxiety about going back to the office, about that whole social side of I'm not used to seeing my colleagues, I'm not the same fun person I was when I left, and all the social stuff that goes with it. Basically, we're social human beings. We need to be with other people. Total Jobs did a survey, and 52% of people were missing that social interaction of work. That's where they get the majority of their social interactions from. And of course, we've missed out on that. And yes, we've done Zoom, but we all know it's not the same. It's not the same as that quick coffee and chat outside the water cooler. It's not that sort of, you come off a call with someone and you're really stressed about what you said, you can just turn to your colleague. People are saying it's not, they feel if they're phoning up someone while they're working from home, they're making it into a bigger deal, so it's not so comfortable. So I don't think you'll ever be able to replace all that. So whilst, yes, again, some people might think they want more of that flexibility, I think time will tell how much people are actually just want to be back into that social centre as well.
And I suppose, Martin, linked to that, there is, how do you create that social environment in the office place now? Does the office environment change from a HR perspective?
Yeah, entirely. I think to answer your first question, David, in terms of what's the future of work in 12 months' time, I think we're going to see we're going to extrapolate the difference between organisations. By that, I mean those that venture forward and determine and spend time, absolutely to Leon's point, determining what they need and what their staff need and how successful they can be, will have a more flexible approach to work in the future, undoubtedly. We've seen it work, albeit forced, for the last 12 months. With a better plan, why wouldn't it work from now for the future? But there'll be other organisations go, no, thank goodness we're going back to the old norm. There is no old norm, right? We've got a recent Hayes survey describing that 60% of candidates in the future will be looking at flexible working approaches by organisations as one of the significant reasons for making a job move. So the war for talent is there, probably more so in some industries than others. But actually, if we don't, as organisations, look forward to the future and consider, actually, we need to attract the right talent to our organisation. What is the right environment with which to do that? Then actually organisations will lose out substantially. So I do see this extrapolation of flexible organisations and, dare I say it, and some industries, you're absolutely right, you'll stay as you are because that suits your organisation. But do it knowingly, do it mindfully in terms of that's the right way of operating, not, thank goodness we can get back to 2019 because you'll just be overtaken by the competition. So I guess that's where I see 12 months' time, a real distinct difference between approaches. I think now is the time to be thinking about how do we do it differently, and included, to your point, David, it's actually, if we're going to have a more flexible workplace, do not assume that therefore there's a spare bit of office space we can sublet or sell off, because actually collaboration spaces is going to be the phrase. It is going to be the critical need. If you're going to use a hybrid type approach to flexible working, if you're going to get people in a few days a week or occasionally in the week, think about what work you want them to do when they're in amongst their colleagues and doing social contact. Think about, is that the team meetings? Is that the innovation moments? Is it the future strategy? Rather than the day job of being on a phone, which actually most people could do and may prefer to do from home. I do agree with Andy Cast as well, going, it is a mix of the two, of what do people want, or Leon's point, what do people actually want, and engage with them. But I'd also caution, if we'd done a survey, I wish I could have done a survey last January in 2020 and gone, would you like to work from home for 5 days a week? Yeah, a bunch of people would have said yes. And some of those would now be saying no. And just because people think they know what they want, it's not necessarily going to work for them in the future. And certainly we're seeing opinions changing.
And just to jump on the back of that one, the clue is in the name. You have to be flexible and agile about your flexible and agile working policy. You can't just assume that once you've written it, that will be the policy that stays in place forever. It's got to be something that works for everybody and changes.
I think it's ever changing, and we'll never know where we're going to be in 6 months' time. But certainly, there's some great pointers in there. There's one.
David,
go on, Leon, absolutely.
I just think it's a really good recent example of where we're heading. But in my career until last year, I think I'd been asked 3 or 4 times ever by clients about, can we employ someone to work from home in Barbados, for example. I've been asked it multiple times in the last few months, where brilliant staff are saying, I can do this job from wherever. And it's notable that the BDI and other places are looking at making it much easier for people to work remotely for British, European companies. And I think that tells us something, doesn't it, about the direction of travel.
Definitely.
And I think, Leon, the question here from Julie. Julie, thank you very much for the question. It's a great question related to what Leon's just said. Julie asks, how can we accommodate potential requests for flexible working? And are there any contractual considerations we need to be mindful of? I think, Leon, that's probably one view to start with, and maybe Martin, you to jump in as well on.
Yeah, no, happy to. And I mean, as ever with these, there's a legal answer and there's a practical answer. And I think the practical answer at this stage, particularly if you are thinking about a wider engagement piece with staff about what does the future look like, there may be a bit there to talk to this member of staff and say, this is something we're looking at as a whole. If you're happy with the status quo just for the moment, let's park it and see where we end up. Don't worry if you're not happy with where we end up. We'll come back to your flexible working request. But if that's not possible for whatever reason, then the strict legal answer is, if the person has been with you for 6 months or more, you are obliged to deal with their flexible working request, and there is a process to go through to deal with that, which broadly involves meeting with them to discuss it and giving them an outcome. Now, if the answer is no, you need to be relying on a specific reason. There are recognised reasons to be saying no, but it sort of highlights a point we've been touching upon, which is those reasons for saying no are probably going to have to be a hell of a lot better now than they were in the past, if it has been working,
Yeah.
So, but certainly if you do agree, then yes, we're into it's a contractual permanent change. Now, again, often it may be sensible to say let's trial it for a certain time, just in case you don't think it works out, or we don't. But yes, I mean we are immediately into, if it is agreed, it's a permanent change, and sometimes staff don't sort of recognise that or think about that. So, but normally you would then confirm that's now a contractual change. But the devil will be in the detail. If you're saying no, what is, that's always the key. What is the reason for saying no? Particularly if it's driven by childcare issues, a disability or something similar.
I'm with you. Great. And Martin, just before we come to yourself on the second half of that, there's just to give Andy and Joe a bit of pre-warning. There's a great question here from Ken. Ken asks, and I think there's a psychology part to this question, and then there's a practicality question to this question. Ken asks, how can we work with staff to reassure them over the concerns of the same commutes? People aren't necessarily worried about returning to the safe office environment because they, as Martin mentioned, probably trust their employees to create a safe office environment, but public transport, it can't be created as safe. There's certainly a psychology piece to that I just want to open up for Joe and Andy. But and before we get to that question, I wanted to get the HR perspective on Julie's question. Sure. Martin, how do we deal with those potential requests for flexible working?
Yeah, so what we've got here is actually overlapping demands. We've got the demands of getting back to office. It's the transition from COVID era, and hopefully a government position on a legal right for offices to reopen. We've also got, as we've described, this future of work, this new way of working, which ultimately has to play into any flexible working request moving forward. My advice to any organisation at the moment is very similar to Leon's, actually, in regard. They've got a legal right with 6 months or more. It's been around for nearly 20 years. So if they've requested it formally, then you're going to have to go through that process. But if you can encourage a trial period, or indeed we're looking at that in totality and we're coming back to you. If you don't yet have your strategy for future of work, how you're going to operate moving forward, if your industry or your profession has changed, is likely to change the way in which it operates in the future, try and get to that point without starting to meet individuals and discuss that formally. Or use the trial option that says, look, we could put it in place for the next 6 months whilst we undertake a company-wide strategy on our future of work. So if you want to work to something with the organisation's permission whilst we consider it, I would try, if you can possibly avoid it, to move down any more formal arrangements if you've still got a future of work strategy to design. Because, of course, the more complicated you make it prior, the more difficult it is then to roll out the future strategy, whatever that is. Okay. I think that answers.
Well, that covers it. It answers it really well, and some real good, practical, sound pieces of advice. And I love it when somebody from a law perspective says, well, there's a law answer and then there's the practical answer. So thank you for that. And then to this, Ken, fair play to you. This is a real tough question. And I head to London on Tuesday morning for the first time in over 14 months. I live in Gloucestershire, and I know my employers have created a very safe environment within the office, but it's GWR, it's the tube, it's public transport through London and all the rest of it. And there is a little bit of, for me personally, I don't mind saying it, a little bit of psychology of how safe is this? And I suppose I'd love to start there with Joe and Andy, and then maybe Martin, that piece around how we manage that and help people to get over it from a HR perspective. But Joe, Andy, any particular thoughts on this? You know, the anxiety around commute to work. Joe, go first. Go on.
Yeah,
tell you ready.
I'm jumping to get in there because I've literally just put myself in the shoes last week of writing something that's all the anxieties about people worrying back to work. And, you know, a lot of people worry about the things that they can't control. And whilst we may know that our employers have our best interest at heart and they might be trying to control some of the environment at work, we know for a fact that we can't control how close someone's going to stand next to us on a tube or on a train, or come and sit next to us, or wear a mask or not wear a mask. Any situation that we put into where we feel we need to confront someone and even be assertive and say, sorry, can you just step back? The thought of doing that can make us worry. And then if you haven't asked them to do that, are you then responsible that you haven't asked them to do that? And then you're going into an office and you're meeting with colleagues, and then you can start worrying about the fact that you're responsible for taking something into the office. And so it can snowball. And, you know, some of those thoughts, you know, we can all get caught up in them. They're not necessarily true, but we get anxious about worrying. And then, of course, that's not bringing your whole self to work, being able to perform at your best. And it's not an ideal situation for anyone. So obviously, we're never going to be able to control all these other people. So I think it's about the fact of having an individual conversation with your employers, doing what it is that you can do to try and manage it. Are there staggered working times? I know that these have been discussed and considered. Are there quiet times you can go? I mean, I don't have all the answers and looking in for the more practical steps to come through, but it's just literally for where I am, the organisation, to understand these different concerns and worries. And it might be that if someone is saying that they tried to come into work, they couldn't get all the way, they've had to go back, that actually the organisation understands that that might happen, that, you know, they've got your back. And, you know, there's this period of transition of, you know, that everything might be how it might be in 6 weeks' time, but during this time we understand, and we're here to help support you. So I don't know whether, Andy, you can start building on some of those more practical sort of suggestions as well.
I mean, everything you just said there, Joe, is perfect. The only thing that I suppose I would add is the fact that, as you said, it's the control that people have. And if you can give control to your employees about how they will face the answers. As an employer, yes, we are there to support our staff, but we can't make all the decisions for them. And in fact, that would make it worse, because as soon as you start making decisions for people, you take the control away. So I would be having conversations with people about, okay, what's the commute to work going to look like for you? Have you considered what you'll do differently as you start planning your journey? It's very much about giving them back as much control as they possibly can, with the knowledge that they're going to feel uncomfortable, and actually appreciate. Say to them, I can see that this might be quite tough for you. Have you thought about what you're going to do to make that better? What can I do as your employer, as your manager, to help that situation? You're not going to have all the answers as an employer. It would be impossible for you to have the answers. But what you can do is demonstrate to your employees that you're thinking about their welfare, you're thinking about how difficult this might be for them, and you're there to support them with any choices they make about how this goes forward. I think that's the best practical steps I can suggest.
I think huge practical steps there from Andy and Joe. I think I would add a couple, and I've been advising a predominantly London-based organisation with sales, telesales, and customer service type operations. And one of the managers is keen to meet his team for believe it or not, for the very first time. It was a new idea. It was a customer success function that started to build up at the beginning of last year. It now totals something like 35, 40 heads. And although he's worked whenever he could, whenever the offices were available, he's worked from the office. Most of his staff have not. They've worked successfully from home. So he wants to put together a team meeting and an update. And initially the idea would be, can we all travel in and put some expense behind a social events, etc.? And of course, that's a good approach. But the advice we've been giving is actually, instead of, or in addition to that, if they're prepared to meet up on a social front somewhere in London when a pub or restaurant is open, why don't you come into the office? Why don't we find some space for you in that office for you to meet as a team for a couple of hours? Make it a team event, slightly more business orientated, and then go off and have some social engagement as well. And that way, for me, the key here is now, and David, you made the point very, very clearly, the office feels safe. But I've certainly seen in our earlier returns with clients, when they got back into the office, people were quite surprised how much effort the employer has gone to make sure it's safe. And actually, that's a reassuring point itself. So as many pairs of eyes that we can get to see an office environment in its health and safety perspective helps with the whole concern about returning to the office. And then you break it down to the practical steps about the travel in terms of Joe and Andy, and in terms of envisaging how does that individual get through it. And you're right, it's manager-led conversation, but it's the individual to think about it. Another piece, final bit I'd say on this is, do you have to force the return? Can you actually make it over a period, a voluntary basis? And actually you'll start to see a percentage of the population returning. And if you've got it right, and maybe the train travel is not as most of those individuals feared, word will soon spread that actually this is it's manageable and we can deal with this. And before you know it, you'll see more people return. If you don't have to mandate a return, why choose to mandate it? Why don't you do it on a voluntary basis?
Good points.
And you've triggered a memory for me there, Martin, about Joe and I actually interviewed someone who'd been through a really difficult job interview process. And one of the tips that she said was that if she'd have had a photo of the room that she was going to be interviewed in, it would have been a lot less anxiety because she would have known what to expect. It was the surprise that was caused. So yes, if you can take photos, or even I saw on LinkedIn the other week, a manager had done a video of everything that they'd done in their new premises to make sure we were COVID safe. And send that out to all the staff. It just makes so much difference when you alleviate the unknowns. You know, this is what your office now looks like now, because this is what we've done to protect you and bring you back to work in a safe environment. It's just those creative thoughts are a really way to move forward and make the people feel better, and not so much about the journey, but perhaps the other end of the journey, they know that you are looking after them.
Okay, sounds like good stuff. That journey thing is a tough one to overcome, but it's great to hear that so many organisations, and I know mine has, gone great lengths to make the environment safe. I'm going to go through a couple of practical questions that I've got here. I'm going to bucket them all in, but I'm going to just for the sake of time, we've got 15 or 20 minutes left, and just do a little bit of a quick fire round. Leon, I'm going to frame this one at you first. and relating to how where Martin just left it a moment ago, if an employee refuses to return to work, how can I best manage that situation? I think it's best to start probably with the employment, the law perspective, and then I'm sure somebody else will want to jump in as well. But Leon, if someone refuses to return to work, what's your advice, best course of action?
Yeah, and I'll leave the practical side of things to the other guys to talk about.
Great.
But needless to say, again, that's something I'd normally be talking to clients about, because sometimes by the time you get to the legal, the game's gone. If you've fallen out to that extent, in some respects we're into a different area. But I think my key takeaway is, as the employer, just to be incredibly careful and proceed very, very cautiously, whatever the reason that is given for not wanting to return is. And from a strict legal perspective, my reason for saying that is, if it is at all related to the COVID pandemic, which we've got to assume it's going to be in one way or another, be that the commute, be that the physical environment, be that I still have childcare responsibilities, or another one we're seeing a lot is, I'm fit and well, but have lived with elderly relatives who are very, very vulnerable, so I'm concerned about bringing something back. The second we're into those sorts of realms, the spectre arises if you try and force the employee back, or even dismiss them for refusing to return, that they may be able to bring a claim. We're just starting to see the first case law filter through, and there was actually the first case on this particular topic in a COVID setting last week. But any employee, regardless of how long they have been employed by you, has the ability to argue if they have been subjected to a detriment or dismissed because of raising health and safety concerns. Then we're straight into that's potentially an automatic unfair dismissal, all sorts of compensation available, and it's actually quite a complex legal sort of set of arguments that are going on there, and as ever, all of them are incredibly fact specific. The latest case from last week has just emphasized that point. But really what you are looking at as the employer is, does this employee reasonably believe that coming back to work causes them a serious or imminent danger? And of course, notice, as ever, legally, there's that, do they reasonably believe that to be the case? But the next question that follows on from that is, could the employee have expected the danger to be avoided? And part of that actually involves the employee taking appropriate steps to protect themselves. So, like in terms of things like the commute, or if you have social distancing in place in the office, you have made it COVID secure, but actually the employee's got to follow the rules. You can expect them to have to abide by the rules. But the most interesting point arising from that case we saw last week is, the employer puts themselves in the best position by really showing why you need the person to come back. Back to Martin's point, actually there needs to be a good reason to need you back. And what have you done as the employer to reassure them that actually it is safe? Because it takes away that ability for the person to say, I reasonably believed I was in danger. So actually, if you've clearly communicated, you've engaged, you've tried to encourage and show what you've done, and actually that you are compliant, you put yourself in a much better position. If you're falling down in any of those areas, we're immediately dangerous territory at that stage. I kind of come back to each case is very fact specific, and a lot of these issues are quite triggering, for employees. So, if you have got vulnerable parents at home, I completely understand you might be overcautious, but it is worth remembering the government advice about return to work. We're still in that, if you can work from home, you should, but actually things are opening up. So you can go and get a drink outside, you can take the tube, you can do all of these things. So you can help in that area, exactly as we've been talking about showing flexibility about commute times, etc. But ultimately, if you have been reasonable, you're confident that your work environment is safe, and an employee is unreasonably refusing, we may be into territory where you can impose sanctions. But I would do so very carefully, very, very carefully.
Super, Leon. Thank you. Joe, I'm conscious of time, but I'm very conscious of there's a psychology piece in here behind somebody refusing to work. A snapshot from yourself on this, or refusing to return to the workplace?
Well, I mean, as we said earlier, all those individual differences, but in listening to Leon, and I can understand all that's been said there, to me, there's one word that kept coming around to me, which was compassion. And, the person who is doing that, leading that discussion with the employee, making sure that they're getting the message over, that they understand where they're coming from, actively listening. I mean, we've all had line managers in our time who can say they ask how you are, and you could, you don't really tell them because they're not going to understand and they don't really care. Or you've got a different kind of manager who will actively listen to you, actively show compassion, actively want to try and get to a solution, to try and meet you midway. And there's a big difference there. So for me, as someone who might be worrying to go back to work, I might not be able to convey all of those worries and refuse to go because I don't think they're going to be heard by the person I'm talking to. And so they may think they've ticked all the boxes that Leon is saying, but they haven't actually met any of my needs because they haven't actually understood or shown that they've understood or shown that compassion. And for me, again, the next level up, that obviously starts with the culture, with the leadership team, leading by example. It's, that the whole thing for me in all of this and going back to work brings it all back down to culture and welcoming, talking the talk, walking the walk. It's, you actually want to show your employees that you understand, that you want to show that you're listening to them, and you need to lead by example.
Super, Joe. Martin, any wash up from you very quickly?
For me, I think on this front, it's make a fuss of the returners, make some events, safe ones, of course, but how do you encourage people back and make a fuss of the fact they're back, but don't exclude those that aren't yet back, especially if you are going down a voluntary route, don't exclude those that have chosen to be at home. Think about actually how do you conduct future team meetings if you've got, and it could be more complex than we've had for the last year. A Zoom meeting, a Teams meeting is, and doing them every hour in a day is hard work. But a Zoom or team meeting where you've got half the people in the office in a meeting room, spread out appropriately, of course, think about the size of your meeting rooms, but also half of them still from home, that's even more problematic. I've definitely seen clients with that issue in the last year across international, where some other offices in other countries are open, but the UK has not been open, and how that mixes and how that works. Dialing into a team meeting where 4 people are in a meeting room and 4 are at home is just about the worst environment to have a proper dialogue. So just think about how you determine that, how do you work? But please don't exclude, if it's voluntary, please don't exclude those that are still at home. And in terms of the individual refusing to return, it's all the steps Leon said there. If you have to have them back, what's happened in the last 12 months? Have you been productive in the last 12 months? That would be my challenge every time.
Great points. Very good points. A quick fire question for yourself, Andy. We've never had a flexible work program, but we feel that we should have one on offer. Where would we start? And I've deliberately come to yourself just to get a short answer because I've got a couple of more complicated, well, very complicated leadership questions in a moment.
Yeah, so a very short answer, speak to someone who knows how to implement it. Come and talk to us at ProAction HR. If it's never been there at all before, then come and talk with us because you'll need some professional advice on how to do it and engage your employees. That's a quick answer.
Super stuff, Andy. Super stuff. And we've got a great question here from Melissa. Thank you, Andy. We've a great question here from Melissa that I want to combine into a leadership question. With the pandemic, there has been a huge increase in staff reporting mental health concerns. It is predicted that mental health will be a key management issue moving forward for line managers in particular. What advice would you give to line managers? And I think I'll combine this with a slightly broader question. What advice would you give to line managers in relation to mental health in the workplace? But also, I think it's worthwhile combining this with, how do we expect leadership teams and leadership approaches to change over the next 12 months related to the way the world is changing? So I think maybe, Joe, can I put you on the spot on the mental health side of things? And of course, the leadership side of things linked to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really, really good point. And we're seeing that change out there. Obviously, mental health in the workplace is nothing new. But as Melissa said, it's a rising concern. And, you know, the thing that we have to put in place there is support for the line managers, enable them to have access to information that they feel comfortable, so that they're not afraid of talking about it. So they're not keeping it away, they're bringing it in, they're welcoming it. There is a duty of care there. There's, you know, so does your line manager need any training in this area? Are there policies and procedures in place? One of the most important things is that people who are raising this discussion is that they have signposts available to them. They're never, you know, they're not going to be an expert. We don't expect them to be an expert, but if they can point the person in the right direction to access further help and support, that's the most important thing. Then we've talked some of those softer skills earlier about the compassion and the active listening. Then there's a whole other level of different programs that you might want to put in place and really have a well-being program that's being considered. It doesn't have to be all singing and all dancing, but it can be something that you're saying, right, have an objective here. We know this is becoming prevalent. We want to understand what it is for our individuals. We want to know what it means for our individuals. And these are some of the things that we can put in place. But it will mean something different to every single person who mentions it. So it's about understanding all those variety of needs. So for me, the crux of it is support your line managers. We don't want them to feel panicked in that situation and stay away from it. It needs to be an encouraged dialogue and provide them with the skills and signposts they need to have those discussions.
Great stuff. I can imagine it's only just too difficult for the line managers being kind of almost stuck in the middle, but I suppose then that leads to the leadership piece, Andy. I know you were keen to add.
Yeah, I think this is an ideal opportunity, if the leadership don't already do it, but to share their own vulnerability. Because what better way of getting your employees to talk about their mental health and how their experience has been over lockdown than to say, do you know what, it's been really tough for me too, and these are the issues I've had. I've found it difficult. I've had days where I didn't want to get up. Any of that sharing of vulnerability is bound to make things better for individuals to come and talk to you or your line managers about the issues they've been having. And lastly, from my perspective, don't make assumptions. Don't make assumptions about anyone. We've all had really different experiences over this period, some good, some bad. You know, we can't say it's all been bad. Some people have had some really great experiences, you know, learning to use Zoom and Teams. They have benefited from it. But the majority of people will have had negative experiences. But we shouldn't make assumptions that everybody has had the same experience.
And Martin, I think knowing the roles that you've held over the last couple of years and what you've been involved with over the last couple of months, any final thought on that leadership transition from yourself before we move on to another question?
Yeah, a couple of things struck me just listening to Joe and Andy there, actually. I mean, Andy didn't use the phrase necessarily, but it is that authentic leadership that's required. A lot of organisations will have shown that in the last 12 months. If they haven't so far, now's the opportunity. And it really is, from a mental health perspective, if ever there was a time to make this public and a regular conversation in the organisation, it's right now. And that kind of, for me, links directly to Joe's point about the line management and their need for skills, but also put it in their perspective. They're also human beings. They've also had to line manage remotely for the first time ever over the past 12 months. They'll also have had parenting issues. They'll also have had caring issues. They may well have had mental health issues themselves. So how do we help them understand their own perspectives and where they're at? Because guess what? If they can understand their own position on things and be open about it, authentic management, authentic leadership, then actually they're much more able already better skilled to be able to deal with the staffing issues that they're undoubtedly going to be facing, not just for the next 6 months as we return, but actually for the next few years. This is something that has created chaos in the mental health space. Joe's point, we've already had mental health issues. This has just perhaps brought it more to the fore.
Great stuff. Thank you very much. I think I'm going to squeeze one last really simple, quick fire one in before we call it a day. And Leon, it's one from you, a real quick fire one, but it's one that's I'm going to ask you to answer it quickly, but there's probably a wider answer. Would you recommend the obligatory COVID test on arrival at the office?
Wow, I'll try and answer this.
I'm going to put pressure on. 30 seconds. Go on.
As quickly as possible.
Yes or no?
If we're talking about the lateral flow test, I mean, would I recommend it? It depends on the business, and I mean, if you're going to do it, there are a whole heap of considerations, including that the government guidance is pretty woolly and doesn't really help employers. You then need to think about a whole heap of things. How are you going to do it? The data protection angles of what information you request, and what if someone says no, either for a protected reason, i.e. they're concerned about their human rights or some form of discrimination, or if they point out the lateral flow tests aren't actually that accurate. I'm more concerned about your other COVID safety. So I certainly, making it obligatory, potentially difficult. I would have it as one of your suite of solutions to make a workplace COVID secure, and perhaps focus on some of the others.
Cool. Martin, 30 seconds on yourself. COVID test, obligatory or not?
Look, the workplace and making it safe is all based on risk. You improve the risk position by testing, but the likelihood is you'll get people saying no. So for that reason, unless you're in customer-facing organisation where you're in people's homes, I cannot see at this point, and the environment might change. There might be more government pieces, testing to go to pubs, etc., or to stadia, etc. That might come in and it might change the feeling in the UK. But for now, my strong advice is not to make it mandatory, to encourage it, to put a vaccination and testing policy in place, to really encourage as many people to take first of all, get the vaccination, but also to test on a regular basis. 2 months ago, the testing was not freely available, and it was employer-led if we could get hold of it. Now it's freely available throughout the UK. So why don't we just encourage it and encourage people to look after health in the same way as we encourage them to think about their health, full stop.
Great stuff.
It's always worth checking the latest guidance, because it is literally changing day by day. It's the first time in my career where every time I get asked a question, I have to go and check that the guidance hasn't changed since I read it yesterday.
Well, I think that summarizes it very well. I think the business leader and HR leaders of today need to be on their toes. Looking at it from the four people in front of me, just what struck me through the last hour is that that it zipped past really quickly. But I think part of the reason that it zipped past very, very quickly is there's quite a nice balanced picture around the problem that we were discussing. We have Joe from a business psychology perspective, Andy from a wellness, leadership, development perspective, Leon from the employment law perspective, and then I'll dare say I'll put Martin in charge of it all and kind of wrapping it all together from a HR perspective and deployment perspective. And there's, from my perspective, what a great team to get all of those lenses on it and hopefully get balanced solutions pulled together for end clients and users. It would be my observations on the basis that many different heads make great solutions and all of those types of bits and pieces. I'm sorry we didn't get to all of the questions. There's a few there. I've made a note of them. You might have seen me holding up my phone just to make sure I got a picture of them. I'll share it with the ProAction team in case we lose it at the end when we shut off. But if anybody wanted to get in contact or pose any particular questions to the team here, please don't contact me. I'm the last person you need advice from this type of stuff from, but please do reach out to the ProAction HR team. Any one of the forum, you can find their contact us page at www.proaction-hr.co.uk. With the recording, we'll also, or the ProAction HR will also send a recording of this webinar to you on email, and their contact details will also be on the email. I think that leaves it for me to say thank you, Joe. Thank you, Andy. Thank you, Leon, and thank you, Martin, for taking part today. And most importantly, to the great attendees and the great questions we have. I think it was an hour very, very well spent with some great practical tips to take away. Thank you very much indeed. Martin, anything else to close before I
would say thanks for chairing it, David, and good luck as we return.
See you all soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye.